Okay, so I'm going to do something I don't normally do, and I'm actually going to review a movie that I watched. And this is because I was so perturbed by how bad it was that I just kind of couldn't really contain myself. I, my wife does this thing for me once a year on Father's Day where I just leave and go see two or three movies a day during the day, and it's wonderful. Like it completely. This year I saw Disclosure Day and The Backrooms because it was they were the only things playing that seemed remotely interesting to me. And so this review is about Disclosure Day, and it's terrible. It was easily the worst Steven Spielberg movie that I have ever seen. Now, I've seen plenty of movies that are much, much worse that were directed by somebody who's not Steven Spielberg. And I also haven't seen every single movie he's made, though I've seen a lot of them. But still, I was quite shocked that the same guy who directed Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, Jaws, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, and we could go on, that guy could make a movie as fundamentally flawed as Disclosure Day. This movie fails as a basic film and strays so far afield that it ends up promoting a deeply immoral message. And I'm going to refer to it as a movie because when you call something a film, that kind of indicates this has artistic merit. This movie has no artistic merit whatsoever. It's that badly made that any artistic merit is just lost. So I won't bury the lead as to why here. Spielberg and David, I think I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Cope, they're the credited writers, they present alien abductions as a good thing in this movie. And this is at best just moral idiocy. Now, to give you more detailed explanations, I have to delve into spoilers. Now, the movie's been out probably almost a month by the time I put this up, and really there isn't a whole lot to spoil, as if you've seen the trailer and read the title, you know exactly what's going to happen in this movie. Nonetheless, if hey, this bothers you, you're planning to see it, you want to be surprised, etc., you've been warned, turn off. So the premise is that most, or maybe all, of the rumors and stories, etc., that you've ever heard about aliens, crash ships, abductions, and the government covering it up, it's all true. And there's a government organization that's been hiding this information for nearly 80 years. Would-be whistleblowers within that organization have now stolen, I guess I should have done that because it's questionable if the government organization actually owns it, so how could they steal it? And that's one of the things the movie tries to play with, but in a bad way. Well, they've stolen data and files on aliens and are trying to make this public, i.e., they're going to do the Disclosure Day. Then about 90 to 95% of the movie is a very poorly contrived cat and mouse game as the whistleblowers are running away and these government agents are moving in. But this movie is stupid and lazy because it doesn't even take its own premise seriously. When I described the premise to my 10-year-old daughter, because I told her what I was seeing and why, she said that actually sounds like a good movie. And she's right because the concept has a lot of meat, but the movie just wastes the meat. It wastes the premise of this. You see, the really interesting and philosophically interesting and culturally and sociologically interesting idea behind a Disclosure Day is, well, how would the world, culture, our societies, governments, and religions change and react, or maybe even not react? If it was undeniably obvious that alien life not only existed, but had visited Earth and maybe was even here, would our society and institutions just collapse? Would we unite all as something like Star Trek or the XCOM games? Now, that's a good question for a story to explore, and I'd like to see more stories with different takes on it. As a side note, if you haven't played the XCOM games, the modern iterations like XCOM Enemy Unknown, XCOM Enemy Within, XCOM 2, and XCOM War of the Chosen, you need to do that. They're fantastic. But back to track here now. Disclosure Day makes no serious effort to address these types of questions. There's some throwaway dialogue in the first act that pays lip service to it, and that's it. You could actually even cut that dialogue out, and it makes no difference whatsoever to the movie. The disclosure actually happens at the end of the third act, but then the movie ends before anyone has time to process, react, or say anything about it. This is just lazy and stupid. Imagine how much more interesting it might have been if, say, the Disclosure Day happened and then it turned out nobody cared because we were all too wrapped up in our phones, memes, and social media posts. Or maybe because the information comes through the news media, a significant amount of the population distrusts it, thinks it's a lie, or thinks it's that itself is the conspiracy and the aliens are a lie. Something interesting like that. Now, I think it's unlikely a guy like Spielberg would go in either of those directions, but at least then the movie would be attempting to say something. The movie sets itself up as if it has this profound and very interesting thing to say, and then when it has the chance to do so, it just ends. This is worse than the most annoying cliffhangers, as every structure of the movie has been building to that moment, but then rather than let us have the moment and say something, Spielberg immediately cuts to credits. Again, perhaps if he'd let that moment play out, I wouldn't have liked his take on those questions. Maybe I'd think he was wrong. But at least then he would have had something to say that I could engage with. Right now, it ends up being very much like the worst of continental philosophers and theologians who just refuse to say anything tangible that can be evaluated and then go around acting like they've said truly profound things. So, there is a risk involved in showing how the disclosure day would play out, but it's much better to take a risk that fails to pay off than to actively refuse to say anything at all. Now, further, this movie has a lot of bad writing and bad direction, and again, I was absolutely shocked by this, as no other Spielberg movie I've ever seen has had this problem. He's made some truly phenomenal movies. He's made some that I didn't enjoy and that I didn't think worked very well, but none of them that I ever saw that he's made were lazy and stupid. This one is. So I'll give you some examples here. The agents of the highly trained, secretive Black Ops organization that's been keeping the existence of aliens under and all the evidence therein under wraps for nearly 80 years is so incompetent that they don't even form perimeters around structures when they're pursuing people, and they'll just stand around in gaggles waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. Barely trained patrol cops who've been on the job for less than a day know better than to do that. But these guys are supposedly highly trained secret agents, and this one bothers me quite a bit because it's a mistake that's so easy to address by just having the actors do some basic tactics. You don't even need to rewrite the script. But no, all the agents pull up in black cars and then stand around and wait for somebody to tell them what to do. So, if I take this movie seriously, the existence of this Black Ops organization is evidence of the existence of God, and that he wants aliens to remain a secret, because they're so horrifically incompetent that there's no way they kept the existence of aliens under wraps for 80 years unless God himself was ensuring that was so. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating. I did come up with that line because I think it's funny. But I'm not. That really is how bad this Black Ops organization is at its only objective. Even if the bad guys having a basic concept of tactics wasn't in the script, I'm left wondering, how did somebody not say to Spielberg or one of the producers, wait, these guys look dumb. Let's have them move and react like actual soldiers or law enforcement to make them look like more of a threat. It'll be more interesting. Now, further, a key plot point in the first act is that the main villain can use an alien device to astral project into other people. So he does this into the girlfriend of one of the two protagonists, and he's doing this to attempt to locate where they are, and then he mind controls her to try to get her to kill the protagonist, because that's what his objective is. Now, this fails, but he could just do it again. He could just astral project into her again. So the girlfriend tells the protagonist when they're on the run at a motel somewhere, tie me up so I don't try to kill you. So, naturally, the villain does do it again and then uses her sight, because he can see what she sees, to find the address of the motel that they're hiding at, and then he sends his agents to capture them. Now, this is dumb. Given that the girlfriend is a liability at this point, the protagonist should have just left her behind. You could maybe argue, hey, he loves her too much to do that. Now, the movie did not show us that he has that level of love for her, but okay, fine. Let's just grant you that. Why didn't he just put a blindfold on her in addition to tying her up? That's an easy and obvious solution. I literally thought of that while I was watching the scene play out in the theater. It's easy and obvious, and if I can think of it while I'm sitting there in the theater, how did nobody making the movie think about this? And there's lots of things in this movie that are like this. There are many simple and completely obvious errors in storytelling that I've never seen in a Spielberg movie before. As another example, they make Emily Blunt's character into a get-out-of-jail-free card who can just do whatever the plot requires. The more technical term for this is a deus ex machina, and this is when the writer has so painted his characters into a corner that they need the gods to come down and save them. Now, characters in a good story need to have agency, and having the gods come and save them essentially ruins that. They need to suffer the consequences for their actions, and when the gods come and save them, then they don't. This is the story breaking its own rules. It's kind of like when my son wants to play a game, but he's making up the rules as we go along. Yeah, it might be kind of whimsical and fun the first time, but if you don't have consistent rules, how can you play the game? Now, if you're knowledgeable about stories and literature, you can point to some exceptions where something like this works, but nearly all of the time this is a bad thing, and it will take an exceptionally skilled writer to pull off a deus ex machina in a good way. So, to continue this example, at one point the other lead protagonist is about to be captured. Suddenly, Emily Blunt just calls him and tells him what's going on. She just suddenly knows his name, phone number, the fact that he's about to be captured, and can tell him exactly what to do. Later, she just knows where he's being held prisoner, can quote the passcodes to the guards, and walks right into the secure facility. Everyone just gets out of her way because when they look at her, they see another human being who's not Emily Blunt that they have a strong emotional connection with. Somehow, simply seeing loved ones just overrides the free will of all these supposedly highly trained government agents who are working in a black ops organization. These agents have apparently been dealing with aliens and alien related technology for years, and the context highly suggests that no, that is not your long dead wife, that's some type of illusion. But no, they just forget about all that, and everyone just gets out of the way for her. And why? Well, the movie never bothers to explain or even hint at a consistent explanation because it's really just using her as a character to keep the plot moving forward instead of trying to do an interesting thing with her, which would be you establish what her abilities are and what limits they have, then show her attempt to use them, fail, learn how to use them more effectively in clever ways that give her character agency, and that makes us want to root for her. Now, the explanation the movie does try and give is that Emily Blunt can know everything there is to know about a person and everything they know simply by looking at them. But the problem is, even if you grant the movie this reality, it breaks this rule multiple times, as her character often knows things about people that she can't see and has never met before. As a rule of thumb, a good story needs to have rules, and even when it's about fantastic things like aliens giving you superpowers, it needs to stick to those rules. Tolkien wrote an essay about this a long time ago called The Ethics of Elfland, where he's basically arguing even if you're writing a fantastic story, make some rules and stick to them. That's how you make it a good story. Even Superman himself needs to be consistent. So the trouble with these get out of jail free cards or Deus Ex Machina characters in events like this is that they will break those rules. Now this breaks immersion and then makes it a bad story. A good story requires consistency, and so when you introduce fantastic elements, you also need to keep whatever rules there are for them consistent. You don't necessarily need to explain those rules to the audience. In fact, sometimes it can even be more interesting if you don't explain the rules and try to leave the audience to just figure out what the rules are themselves. But you at least have to be consistent. As with the above, this is kind of a rule of thumb, as you can point to some examples where an exceptionally skilled writer or director breaks these rules and it works fine, but those are very, very rare. See, what's going on here, I think, is if you just keep things really, really vague and don't define what's going on, you can just keep using Emily Blunt as your get out of jail free card. You wrote the story into a hole and you can't get out? Hey, just have Emily Blunt's character show up and suddenly everything's fine because she walks in and then everyone does immediately whatever the plot requires because of her alien abilities. It's just lazy and stupid. And perhaps this is a side note here. No, it is a side note. But I've read quite a few philosophers and theologians who do similar things wherein they simply refuse to define what they mean and keep it very vague. And then as soon as people accuse them of being wrong, they whine and cry that that's not what they really meant. But the problem wasn't with those other people. It's that those theologians and philosophers flat out refuse to say what they mean. See, the nice thing about being very vague is it's then very difficult for anyone to turn around and claim that you're wrong because that gives you a lot of wiggle room to hide. And this problem functions similarly in story structure. You fail to define and make the rules of your story clear, and then you've got a problem, and you can just invent things out of thin air and claim, well, I never said that that's not the case. We never fully explained what Emily Blunt's abilities are, so we're free to just do whatever we want with her. And the alien devices have the same issue. There's 3 alien devices in this movie that function as MacGuffins as well as get out of jail free cards. They also do whatever the plot requires. In the first act, the villain uses one of them to astral project, like I already talked about. Other times, they're used to make people and objects invisible. And another time, they're used to somehow remotely power and activate electrical equipment, even though that's not how the physical laws that govern electricity work. And when it would create more tension for the plot, one of them is apparently used up and just disintegrates so they don't have it anymore. You see, the writing in this movie is so lazy that they didn't want to have just one Deus Ex Machina, Emily Blunt's character. They needed 2. Well, I guess since there's 3 alien devices, there's actually 4 Deus Ex Machinas in this movie. Now, it's also very clear, as you watch this movie, that the aliens themselves have an agenda wherein they want their presence to be revealed to humanity, and they are guiding and or setting up these whistleblowers to do this. But then, why? The aliens themselves clearly have vastly superior technology. Like there's that quote. I'm pretty sure it's from one of the science fiction authors like Isaac Asimov, but I don't remember exactly which one right now. Where he says something like any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. The aliens are that advanced in this movie, so they don't need to use a local news channel to get the word out. They could easily just broadcast the reality of their existence themselves, or even seize control of the internet. If you have the technology and ability to travel across the vast distance of the universe, then this is comparatively quite easy to do. Alternatively, they could just land a ship on the White House lawn, in front of the Kremlin, or in Central Park. They don't need this long, convoluted plan where they imbue two children with abilities that won't manifest for about 20 years, and then they start working with dissidents and whistleblowers to bring the Black Ops organization down. Further, it's clear that the Black Ops Further, it's clear the Black Ops organization has been interrogating, imprisoning, probably torturing, and murdering aliens for almost 80 years. Why do the aliens keep allowing this to happen and keep coming to Earth and keep crashing their ships here, knowing that this is going to happen? It's dumb. For advanced beings, they act pretty stupid. Now, many of these ideas here could have actually been developed into a good story that made sense if you'd given it to a skilled writer who was trying to take these ideas seriously. Here's some thoughts I had. Give Emily Blunt's character the ability to mind control anyone she sees, and then you can get her to accomplish most of the same things. It'd require rewriting a few things, here or there, but now it makes sense. And then have people who are exceptionally strong willed be able to fight her control, and now it's interesting and challenging because she has to grow her abilities and overcome some things instead of just being able to immediately do whatever the plot requires. Have the Black Ops organization act with competency, wherein the whistleblowers need to be clever in order to escape. Maybe not all of them escape, and the Black Ops people actually wind up killing some of them, and that demonstrates how ruthless the bad guys are. Further, you could have the Black Ops guys arguing that the greater good warrants this type of ruthless action, and now they're interesting villains with a plausible motivation instead of just incompetent fools we don't care about. And there were a few points, I think, where they kind of alluded to that the Black Ops people thought they were uh, doing this for the greater good, but it was like virtually nothing. There wasn't. It was like maybe a sentence or two. Give the bad guys some real motivation that it seems plausible, and now they're interesting instead of just incompetent fools. You could even have the alien agenda work within the limits of this movie. That is, suppose, for example, there's only one or two alien survivors from a crash that happened a long time ago, so they don't have the resources of their whole civilization available. These few survivors have to work with the resources that are available to them on Earth. They literally can't land a ship on the White House lawn, so they have to work in an underhanded way like this. Now, I came up with these ideas to make the movie just a little bit better in less than 24 hours after seeing the movie, and I'm not even being paid to do it, so it seems perfectly reasonable for me to expect Steven Spielberg and David Cope, and I'm sure I'm again mispronouncing his name, to write and tell a coherent story that's better than what I come up with when they're paid millions of dollars to do so, and they're both very experienced filmmakers. The reason I say this movie is deeply immoral is because it presents aliens abductions as a good thing, and even within the movie's own rules, abductions are quite obviously quite evil things. One of the points in the third act is that the two leads were both abducted by aliens as children, and the aliens gave them abilities. These abilities are key to the whole alien agenda and Disclosure Day. Without these abilities, the aliens' plan doesn't happen. This, in effect, says alien abductions are good things. However, this movie is clearly intended to take place in our world. Spielberg himself has even made comments to that effect when he was promoting the movie. You can also see this from the designs of how the aliens, the way they're made to look, mirrors the classic idea of little gray men, and a lot of the documents and evidence the movie presents are clearly meant to mimic real world events and reports and conspiracies such as Roswell and many other things. So this is quite clearly not intended as a throwaway fantasy or sci-fi story with no connection to the real world. It's intended to be a story about our own world. If it wasn't, they wouldn't make use of reports and stories of alien encounters and abductions that circulate in our own world. But see, once you look at the reports of people who've claimed to be abducted by aliens and had encounters with them and so on and so forth, what you find is that the vast majority of the people who report these types of encounters also report that these beings, whatever they are almost certainly evil and or malevolent, and very, very much so. Now, this is not a universal claim. There are some people who claim that their encounters were quite positive, but the majority claim is that whatever's going on here, if those things are real, they're evil. A strong sense of malevolence permeates through the stories that people tell of alien encounters and abductions, and if you just dig into the literature, that's all over the place in there. So, my argument for this movie being immoral is this movie is clearly intended to take place in our world, and it presents a thing that the vast majority of the people who've claimed to experience it say is evil as a good thing. Presenting evil as good is just flat out wrong, and perhaps even evil itself. Now, I do think this might be unintentional, as I really doubt Spielberg and co actually thought this through. Given how lazy and stupid a lot of the movie is, I don't think they thought this through very much at all. So, years ago, I did some basic level research into the alien abduction phenomenon, and I became convinced that the vast majority of the legitimate claims of alien abductions, that is, the people involved, are not lying, mistaken, confused, suffering from mental illness. There aren't, obvious easy other explanations which account for, and those obvious easy other explanations account for well more than 90% of these claims, but there are some that seem like they're legitimate claims. Well, the vast majority of the legitimate claims of alien encounters and abductions, they're very likely demonic encounters, as that just seems to fit the category very well. So naturally, I would argue you should not present encounters with the demonic as a good thing. But put that aside. Even if you assume this movie really is intended to be entirely fictional, disregard Spielberg's authorial intention there and say this is just a fictional story that has no connection to our world. Well, it's still the case that these aliens abduct two 10-year-old children by deceiving them, presenting their spaceship as if it's like a fantasy Hansel and Gretel-esque house, and presenting themselves as animals. It's still just child abduction, and even in a fantasy setting, abducting children is evil. You should be incredibly suspicious of anyone who claims they need to abduct children for the greater good. Human beings are not in an epistemic position to be able to justify such a claim, at least not most of the time. I'm a philosopher after all, I can almost always think of an exception. To justify a claim that doing something is evil, like abducting children, is for the greater good, you need to have a total or near total level of knowledge about the situation, and human beings just don't have that. Neither would alien persons. Even if they had a much greater level of knowledge than you and I do, they wouldn't have that level of knowledge. Only God himself is in a position to make such a claim. So the only way to get out of the moral problems in Disclosure Day is to make the aliens into gods, but this is both philosophically and theologically absurd and ridiculous. And again, kind of a side note, but it's philosophically absurd to make the aliens into creators, something like ancient astronaut theory, because it just pushes all the problems and questions back a step. If the aliens created us, who created the aliens? So they don't function as an actual solution to the questions and problems, unlike a metaphysically necessary being like God. And it's theologically absurd because no serious major religion describes God as anything like the aliens in Disclosure Day, with the possible exception that now in the U.S. there's a more technical term for this, but there's UFO religions where people have actually developed a religion or religion and thing based on reported UFO encounters, and so I guess that would qualify, but I wouldn't classify that as a major religion. So, my main complaint here is, if you take Spielberg's authorial intention seriously, this movie is deeply immoral as it repackages abductions as good things, and those are clearly evil things. If you disregard the authorial intention and judge the movie on its own moral message alone, it's still a deeply immoral movie that presents abducting children as a good thing if you're just powerful enough to do it. And further, again, this is me kind of thinking about this here, this is another case with a little bit of thought and care, they could have actually made this morally interesting instead of just wrong and problematic. You could have actually put some type of a moral conflict into the movie to leave us thinking about. Have the parents of both of the protagonists are abducted when they're children, so have the parents of both of those children be fully aware of what the aliens are doing and giving consent to the aliens because the parents think it's for the greater good. Now, as adults, these two leads have to wrestle with this. Were their parents right? Should they forgive their parents? Be angry with them? Should they betray the alien agenda? There's there's moral grayness and meat behind the bone now. Further, the aliens have the caveat that the parents are consented to this, so it's not so obviously wrong. There's some wiggle room for them here. So this would allude to the questions about consent and how our society treats consent as a be-all, end-all to moral issues. Well, is it still wrong for the aliens to do this even if the parents gave consent? Now you've got a morally meaty issue you can deal with. The whole thing takes on some shades of grayness, and it makes it a far more interesting and compelling story. So after I got done watching this movie left me wondering, why? How did this happen? Is Spielberg so big now that nobody dared to tell him, no, this aspect of the script is a stupid idea that doesn't hold up and you need to rework it? Given that Spielberg has made some truly great movies in the past, and this one is obvious, just so obviously abysmal and foolish, I was just left searching for an explanation as to how this disconnect is possible. So, if my suspicion is correct, this might be a good lesson against pride and for humility. There is a reality for people who are genuinely talented, as Spielberg clearly is. You can't look at the movies he's made and say this guy is not a talented filmmaker. He clearly, obviously is. Well, there's the reality that you can get so successful that it becomes nearly impossible to get anyone to actually tell you the truth. By analogy, this is a problem that if you're a successful politician, you have. The livelihood of the people around you as a successful politician depend on you. And so it's no longer in anyone's interest to tell you unpleasant truths. Hence, it's going to be very, very hard to get people to tell you the truth in that situation. And I wonder if that's part of what's going on here. I think this reality helps explain the extreme arrogance of some people, such as, for example, the Pharaoh of Exodus, and why it seems like many popular and successful people have radically stupid ideas. You can get so popular and successful that nobody's going to tell you no, and so you get some really stupid ideas, and no one disabuses you of them because it's not in their interest to do so. If you're extremely wealthy and powerful and the livelihood of the people around you depend on you, it's going to be very hard for you to get anyone to actually tell you the truth. The natural incentive structure turns so that people around you are incentivized to lie to you to protect their own interests. I even saw examples of this in some of the leadership I served under in the military, where it was very clear they had absolutely no idea what was going on. And I think it's not because they were terrible people, I'm sure some of them were, but rather because I think the people underneath them were flat out lying to them because it was telling the truth in that unit was not incentivized. So I don't know for sure that this problem is what happened with this movie, but I suspect something like this is probably what happened. After all, you're in the film industry. Are you going to have the gall and or courage to tell Steven Spielberg no? Probably not. Now, I'm nowhere near successful enough that I really need to worry about this problem, and if you're listening to me here, it's pretty likely you aren't either. But the point is, we all need some people in our lives who will tell us no when we have stupid ideas, and all of us are going to have stupid ideas. That's part of being human. It's one of the reasons why, as a Christian, I submit myself to the local church. If I start going off the rails there are people there who can tell me the truth and attempt to put a stop to it. It's why I listen to other philosophers when they tell me something is wrong with my ideas. And big picture wise, that's the whole purpose of writing essays and going to conferences to present them, is so other philosophers can hear what I have to say and go, well, maybe you're onto something, but this is way off and you need to fix this. And if I do that and don't listen to them, that's wrong. That's the whole reason why I do that, is to submit my ideas to other people so I can not make these stupid errors. And if we were to interpret Disclosure Day in an ultra charitable fashion and ignore just how lazy and stupid it is, I think something like this is probably the theme or the point that Spielberg was actually trying to make. The movie ends with the word listen, and the anti-alien humans are portrayed as stupid, arrogant, short-sighted, and evil. It's kind of a shame that Spielberg and or Coep, and again, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, didn't take their own advice and listen to other people, as perhaps then they could have humbled themselves and actually made a good movie. We all need humility and people who will hold us to account. And it's clear that both are lacking and needed in Hollywood, as now even Steven Spielberg is making stupid movies that have not been thought through.